but it was stormy, rainy, there was sometimes lightning.
If the next wave is bearing on you, like, be mentally ready to take 2 waves on the head.
There's also the factor of these giant backwashes coming off the cliff. All right, well, let's get into it. Ian, thanks for joining us. You and Kai just went on a crazy adventure that I can't wait to hear about. Just first off, first impressions, how was the Nazaré contest? Was it worth heading all the way over there for it?
I mean, it's always good to go to Europe, I think. The people and the food, and in Portugal in particular, just the people in those small towns, like the town around Nazaré and all the restaurants and stuff, are always pretty awesome to visit, regardless of how the surf is. So I think Europe's still my favorite place to travel to, even just away from surfing. Like, I spend most of my time in the summers that I get a little break. I'll do a strike there to hang out and just eat good food and try to pick up different cultures. So to kind of add that in with the opportunity to potentially get some really big waves, then it's kind of worth the mission for sure.
Yeah, I was so jealous I didn't get to go. I was off on the other side of the world, and originally I was hoping I could be your spotter for the event and kind of watch over you guys from the cliff and maybe get some waves after the event, but it didn't quite work out the timing. But was that a swell that you saw and that you immediately thought like, oh, this is going to be the contest swell, or was it like kind of on the edge?
I definitely didn't think it would be like, it didn't dive out at me as like a really good swell, which is the reason we were both thinking you were probably really excited you were somewhere else and not getting
Yeah, true.
But I think I'd been watching quite a few swells through the winter there, knowing Kai and I were planning on going, and that one didn't dive out to me in particular, especially with some of the ones that had come through in like pretty close proximity to the time of that swell that were relatively similar angles, and the way those correlated to the days there. It wasn't something that was like, oh, these are the alarm bells going off. Kind of like when you see a really big swell for Jaws, or you see a big swell for Waimea for the Eddy. It's like, it starts to kind of stand out amongst the other swells you've been tracking that season. And then I don't know a ton about Nazaré, but the swells and the notes that I've taken from when I've been there a few times, it was the opposite of what like my notes were pretty bulletined at.
When I saw they turned green, I looked at it and I'm like, really? To me, it looked like the swell was pretty west. And it can be that size, but it really has to be the right direction to make those big peaks. Kai, what was your thoughts on that forecast?
I was second guessing it pretty hard, and Ian and I weren't even sure they were going to call it on. Like, there's just no way it was. See, Nazaré likes more northwest, so anything over 300 degrees, anything below that when it's too west, it doesn't hit the canyon, and so it kind of hits the beach break really straight on and just closes out. So you have a lot of swell and doesn't necessarily get taller. It's still big, but it's just unruly. There's just even less of a channel. And then also had southwest wind, which was pretty much devil wind straight into it. Pretty much everything you don't want, they were like, this sounds like the best swell to run on. And throughout the winter, I was hoping they would run at one point because there was better swells than that. And they were like, no, we're holding out for the best one. And I'm pretty sure the fact that they ran it in the worst conditions you could possibly do it means they could run it in anything now, because it can't possibly be worse than that.
Yeah, that's what was kind of, I mean, no matter what, Nazaré is going to be an entertaining contest, but it's that one year that you got that huge right, and you were with Lucas, that was just felt like a historic swell. You know, it was just huge, and the crowds were huge, and you just wonder if they keep running it in subpar conditions, will that sort of public interest lessen? And that was kind of my thoughts. I'd almost be like, oh, I'd rather they almost not run it than run it in smaller conditions. But I understand there's the the sponsor obligations. They want to keep running it just to, secure budget for the next year. I get that. But in big wave events, just like the Eddy, there's something special about it being on a special day versus,
like the integrity
yeah.
of the event it's upheld and put
Right,
on a
right.
pedestal above everything else. And I think that it's always challenging to forecast and call swells, especially in the Atlantic too, because the swells are sometimes a little bit closer. They don't have this big run in like we get from the Western Pacific hitting Hawaii or California. Like it's got a longer lead time to it, where it seems like it's a tighter window there, but the angle I think does really matter. And yeah, I think there was also like quite a bit of weather, which I think we were pretty lucky that it didn't have like any big rain fronts that hit.
Oh, yeah.
There was like a lot of low cloud cover, and it was pretty dark most of the day for both days around that specific swell. And yeah, it's tricky to like even ride the jet ski.
Oh man, it looked like it. And then Kai, your bags just didn't show up either. That was another challenging aspect of it.
Yeah, I think, our fearless leader, Lord Commander Ian, helped us we were almost not going to actually make it to Nazaré because when they called on the yellow alert, internally there was a green alert, but they were still unsure. So it was still, we didn't know when we could leave because they're like, well, are you going to call it on? We don't want to pay $2,000 each ticket to just go to Newark and then have to turn around because the contest is canceled. And so obviously, you end up going pretty last minute always for these types of things. And there was weather on the East Coast of America over in Newark, and a bunch of flights got canceled. I don't know. It was like probably three ticket changes while we were traveling.
I think 4 within like a 3-hour window.
Wow.
So we called a red eye from Maui to San Francisco, landed there, and we were getting settled for our layover until our connecting flight to Newark. And then we realized the flight before ours that had a really tight connection was delayed into Newark. We're like, oh, that's weird. That flight's delayed. Like if we had booked that one, it would have been like perfect timing to get on right now when we're getting off this red eye. And then an hour later, our flight gets announced that it's delayed. And that would give us about just over an hour, like an hour and 5 minutes of landing in Newark and still making our connection from Newark to Lisbon. And so we're like, we have a little powwow and we're like, okay, I think that's enough time that we can make that connection and get on the next flight. The bags, it's a little more risky to not have a few hours traveling internationally from Newark, but we should be able to make it because they're checked through. And then after a short amount of time, that flight gets delayed even longer. So now we're going to completely miss that Newark connection. So it's like a full-blown scramble. And we're like, oh, maybe we can like hop on this delayed earlier flight. So I run over to try to check in with United, like, is there seats? And they're like, yep, there's seats. We can get you guys on this flight. But you guys have checked bags, so we can't let you on this flight. And we're like, what? No, like this would have been perfect. It leaves in 45 minutes and we would have got there a few hours before the connection.
Which ironically, our bags ended up going on that plane anyway.
And then we scramble and get a new flight route through Frankfurt, but it's going to put us in late in the day, the arrival day, which would be late the day before the contest. So we're like, okay, that's, I guess we just have to eat that. And that's what we're doing. And then after like going back and forth with United quite a bit, I found a different route through Munich that it would at least get us in a few hours earlier. So then we changed the tickets again to Munich. And then I realized, I'm like, okay, I had a weird feeling. I'm like, I'm going to double check with them after we changed the tickets for the 3rd time now. Okay, here's all of our bag tags. Each of us had 3 bags, Kai, Mark, and I. So there's 9 bags total. I'm like, can you confirm that these are all still in San Francisco? Because we're rerouting now through Munich at this point. And I'm looking at my air tag and I can't find where my board bag is. And then they do some digging and they're like, oh, actually, your bags just went without you on that early Newark flight that we said you couldn't get on because you had bags.
Oh
And I'm like,
my
how's that happen? And they're
gosh.
like, well, if you're flying domestically, they just go on the earliest possible flight. And I'm like, you just didn't let us on that plane because we had bags checked in.
Oh,
So anyway, then I have to scramble and go online and find a new flight that gets to Newark in time, which is luckily a delayed another flight that's delayed getting in there, and it might just connect with an entirely new ticket we get on TAP Airlines. So all in all, now it's
So
our
now it's
fourth flight.
kind of it's affiliates but carrier change. So then the bags, like no one knows who has the bags.
oh gosh.
And it's pretty important when you try to surf big waves because you want to have the stuff you're used to and what you trained on and developed. And but at the same time, I kind of, when my bags didn't show up, and the confusion actually all stemmed from when we got checked in because our filmer Mark checked in first, and his tag, and because we were under one reservation, his bags got tagged under my name and mine under his, and I didn't realize that. And so when I was trying to like find my bags, I was giving them mine, but they were like, yours already arrived. I'm like, no, they didn't. And so there was a bit of confusion there. And
I mean, it took till literally I ripped the tags off Mark's bags and matched up all the numbers and was like, oh, all the claims we've made at the baggage claim terminal in Lisbon and all like looking for these bag tags are bags they show in their system that have arrived, which is what they kept telling Kai. And he's like, no, I don't have my bags.
yeah, it was just a big
Jeez.
confusion, but Ian's stuff made it. Mark's camera gear made it. I kind of just looked at it as like, all right, well, just kind of, it's just another challenge. And I didn't stress over it really. I mean, up till the next day, there was a chance it could arrive in Lisbon the next morning. I would have missed it for my first heat, but maybe they could get it delivered by my second heat.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen at all. So I was on the phone with them just seeing where it was at, and I wasn't stressed at all, but luckily I got to borrow Ian's fins, foot straps. I had a board from 6 years ago that
Didn't I bring one over there like 2 years ago that the Red Bull guys had? Remember when I went by myself, or was that a different board?
No, the board I used was from 6 years ago. Which is
luckily you
fine.
even had a
Yeah,
board.
seriously.
The problem is the board weighed 20 pounds, and for that day we were out there, you really probably wanted 13 pounds, a lot lighter.
Yeah,
It was choppy, but I think with the advances in the design of the boards, you can get away with a lot less weight, and even just our skill level and being used to those conditions. And so then Nick Von Rupp loaned me his wetsuit and booties, and then Joao Macedo, Portuguese legendary big wave guy, loaned me his inflation, and then Lucas Chumbo had us use his Sea-Doo, and that was pretty rad. So,
It came together.
it came
quick.
together.
Yeah, jeez.
Like,
Yeah, I mean,
but-
you're at the right place for the right equipment, I suppose.
Kind of,
but
because
still,
everyone kind of needs their own gear too. And like it was like we were in our wetsuits in the car getting ready to go out, and he's still like on hold
Jeez.
with like the Lisbon airport trying to track down the bags to see if they might make it for the second heat.
yeah.
I just remember our first heat when we got out there. It felt like such chaos because the waves were breaking everywhere and it was kind of closing out. And there was like probably 7 skis too many that were just out there. It was only
buzzing around.
just buzzing around. And it was like, it just felt chaotic. And we had like 45-minute heat, but it goes by really quick. And I was trying to get Ian on a lot of good waves, but it was so choppy. And our perspective going into it was, okay, based on statistics, the last time I did that event, last 2 times I did the event, you want to get on the biggest wave possible. You want to do big carving maneuvers. They really don't care about the aerials off chops or, anything that's relatively new. And I still felt like maybe they didn't appreciate it in this contest. But the ironic thing was they were focused on not the size of wave, but they were focused on the insiders that were maybe the 8 to 10 foot waves. But it's just strange because we were looking for the 15 to 20 footers out the back and couldn't buy a score over a 5, which was surprising considering some of the larger scores on the inside.
Was that just because they were doubling up more and had more shape on the inside?
I mean,
it could have got smoother and like gave more.
I see.
I think there was like definitely more maneuverable, but it's a fine line. Like, is it a big wave competition or is it like a high performance tow event? Like, I don't know. It's just, it wasn't super clear. I mean, it was clear in the sense that they did say it was catch the biggest wave, do biggest maneuvers, like turns and stuff. But, when you're out there, it's hard to make those adjustments. And I feel like it's a type of event you really need to just be there and spend a lot of time and be really like honed in. And, I think if the conditions were good, we would have been way, I think more comfortable or kind of like locked in. But that wave is so unique. And when it's that rough conditions, it's really limits what you can even do on a performance level.
Yeah, 100%. That's what it looked like. And just, I don't know. Yeah, it goes back to just those conditions definitely didn't help you, along with not having your right equipment. I mean, we know how it feels to show up and have one little thing, even on a normal big wave day, not be how it should be. That's another mental hurdle to get over. But
the good thing about surfing though too is like we all have to surf the same waves.
Right.
So like everyone in the heat is like, we're all looking at each other like, oh, this is pretty buck out here right now.
It's funny because even when we talked to the winners, which ended up being Nick Von Rupp and his partner Clement, they could not believe they ran the event in those conditions based on just what it was. And I started after that event, I was like really questioning, like, did I lose my touch out at this wave? Like, what is going on? Like, before I felt pretty comfortable and I had some pretty good sessions, but maybe I'm just like, am I over the hill out here? Like, I don't know. And then the next day, it wasn't good by any, stretch, but it was so much better than the competition day. Now, this is the following day. Instantly felt way more at home. And I still didn't have my boards, For example, I ended up borrowing a friend's board there that was lighter because, the waves ended up getting cleaner and I just didn't want to ride a 20-pound board. His board ended up being 13 pounds, but his stance was 4 inches narrower than I normally would stand because I use like a 26.5 and he uses 22-inch wide. And I usually measure from the inside of both bootstrap screws. And so that's quite a bit narrower, especially when you're going that fast and trying to do tricks and stuff. You kind of want a wide stance to like be able to grab the rail and suck the board up to you. But as the days went and I ended up staying longer than these guys did, it just kept getting easier and better and more fun. I was like, gosh, they could have just waited like 3 days for it to actually be good. And it wasn't good at all, actually, in comparison to what it could be.
Right.
In watching those days too, like you could see the waves were like a little bit more identifiable, like what is more peaky, what has more wall, what might have a little bit more of a double up to it to like pull the bumps out of the face and smooth it out. Where I think, when it has that wind we had the day of the event, that rib kind of translates right through the right and can move right through the left as well in the face, especially if it's slopey and doesn't pull itself tight.
Yeah.
It can be like you're going over, even though you're not going into the wind, you're still riding over the rib lines trying to place the turns.
Yeah, and just I feel like too, when it's that big peak, like in the past, you're able to let go early, set up for, some tricks and stuff. But I feel like when it's west, one long wall, you don't really have that much of a time, at least. And then when you're on the wave, you're searching for any type of face. And it looked like you guys, it was just like, once you make it around it, the wave was just done.
Or it's like a big, like maybe just off camera is like a giant, frothy, foamy right coming at you. So you're like that.
You're
a lot
like
of times you're trying to like.
On camera, it doesn't look like you're very deep.
Yeah.
And then, but in reality, the reason why you're not deep is because you're trying to run and get out before it just apexes you. And even not the biggest Nazaré day, but it was still 20 footers out there.
Pound you so
it'll
that
just
wave is, leave a mark for sure.
It's that wave is like, we watched the footage afterwards. I'm like, it did not feel the way it looks.
Really?
No.
It felt like the scariest session you could imagine, like heavy, gnarly, because of its
Even just riding the
unruliness.
ski, yeah, it was so tricky to like navigate through. But and on the like when you watch the footage of it, it looks smoother from like a drone or from a pulled back like land angle, and then you actually get in when you see the water angle, and you're like, oh, there's like
Oh,
you
yeah.
see like some of the other surfers and ski drivers like going over these lumps of rib that are like 3-4 feet high.
Yeah, it's like at Jaws we get bump, but it's not that big of a deal because it's rather organized. They're all coming from the same direction. It's easier to navigate, but there's also the factor of these giant backwashes coming off the cliff. So when you have wind shot mixed in that, it's like you're in I don't know, it's just a mess.
Cauldron
washing machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then how was I think it's been like 3 years since I've been there, and I remember the crowds were already pretty intense, but from like the videos we've talked about in the past few months, the craziness with people falling over each other and stuff, was it, since you'd been back last, did the crowd seem pretty intense on the free surfs or not too bad?
I mean, I want to say it wasn't that bad at all. It actually reminded me of the first time I ever went there to surf, which was like 2015, which is crazy to think it's like 10 years ago. That was like very few skis, and it was pretty like, amicable and who catches waves. And it was like that this time around. And I think the only reason is not because people have lost interest in the wave. It was just the conditions were so poor that no one was going out. I remember even after the contest, we went out and I was going to foil because it was not good for surfing, but it was all right for foiling. You could get the swells that were breaking way out because there was another big swell. And literally there was no one else out but myself, one of my friends over there, Jose, and, Luca Padua and Aloe from Mavericks.
Oh, sick.
They just were out there. And I mean, they're 23 years old and pretty diehard. So it was just like kind of us floating out there. And I was like, this is the most uncrowded I've ever seen. It was
Really?
The most crowded was in our heat, which is ironic because there was only 3 tow skis, but there was like, I swear 15
what were all the skis doing
camera
out there?
skis, safety skis, and backup skis. But it gets just claustrophobic when you get 25 skis out on the water. And it really wasn't that bad the other days. I just think no one's trying to surf when it's west with south winds.
That's like the worst case
The
scenario.
only other person that I know that's that dedicated to it consistently is probably Lucas Chumbo, who's willing to go out no matter what because he's, just trying to get better or, maybe bored on land. Like he's just willing to risk it all. And we got to see some pretty hectic, I would say jet ski wipeouts while we were there. It was that place. It's not a matter of if, but when you lose a ski. And I say this time, every time I saw one of the skis get lost, I was like, wow, it's one of the gnarlier ones I've seen. Wow, it's getting progressively worse. And then the day I actually left Nazaré, which was like on the 6th day I was there, it was by far the most heavy jet ski wipeout I've ever seen. And I cannot imagine it getting any gnarlier than that.
Was that the one where it went over the top of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a
my
50
God.
foot wave.
It's like every day there. I felt like, every day we were
When you were
there,
on the cliff,
someone's,
right?
sending
Oh
in a
my
video.
gosh.
Yeah, when I just went to take a peek at it like in the afternoon one day, and we just watched like 2 crazy jet ski scenarios, and you're like, it's one of the hardest
But it's
places
not
in the world.
It's not because they're bad jet ski drivers.
No.
It's like just wrong place, wrong time.
Oh.
And if you are so willing to not lose your guy, like, okay, I'm gonna pick him up no matter what, that's when you kind of get in trouble. You almost have to like read the room and be like, okay, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to get worked for a while before I can safely get in here.
I kind of thought that with Kai too, and we spoke about that because the swell was short interval as well when we were out there. It's like if he finishes the wave and either does an air to kick out or he flies over the back and you can get him quickly, then you can kind of get him before the next wave if it's bearing down on you or shifts in a little bit. But if he falls on a wave, those few seconds where he's just surfacing and like getting, I guess, his awareness with which direction he's facing after the fall or looking for his board, those seconds really close the gap down between a shorter interval swell and the waves on you. So it's kind of like what we spoke about was like, if you get smoked and it feels like the next wave, if there's not much behind it, obviously I'll be right there. But if the next wave's bearing on you, like, be mentally ready to take 2 waves on the head.
Right.
And then no matter what, the third one, I'll be there. But you kind of, the shorter interval, that time gets so short.
And if you find yourself at the apex of one of those wedges too, the wave comes together and the whitewater just shoots out so far that gives you even less time, and that thing is going twice as fast as a normal wave. So you may look back and think, oh, I have time. That thing's going to race up to you way faster than you think, I feel like.
And a lot of times it's in turbulent water because it's after a pretty big wave if you just towed into the wave there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, it's not like a smooth canvas you're riding the jet ski. So
you're like bucking
wild around, so you're losing ground a lot of time. Well, this wave, those bumps, it doesn't affect its speed at all.
Yeah.
So if anything, that accelerating behind you, and then the jet ski is having traction issues with getting water into the impeller, and you're hitting bumps trying to ride. So it's just, it's kind of like a nightmare fuel.
Because we're regular foot, you end up wanting to go right mostly, and that puts you right up against the cliff. And so that's the danger gets even worse because now you're really in front of the cliff and you could easily lose your board on the rocks. And, to recover that is maybe life or death. So most time you kind of have to allow it to bounce around to the point where it eventually makes it to the beach. The current either sweeps it out and another wave brings it in. But it was like one particular moment that was pretty nerve-wracking. And this is why you want spotters and a third safety is, the next day when I went out and foiled, I basically caught a right and I wanted to go left, but the left lookout was shut down. So I went right. And Nazaré is without a doubt the hardest wave I've ever foiled in my life because of the current, the warble. There's just the water density changes like when the closer you get to that cliff. It's really easy to foil if you go to third peak, but when we're talking first peak, second peak, especially on west swells, that current runs along there through that little channel, and it just makes it just really hard. So you ride a wave half the size of what you could ride, and it feels like the biggest wave you've ever ridden. Long story short, I ended up going right, and my driver Jose was going left, and this is where things can go wrong really quick, and it be no one's fault, but just circumstances of the situation. I ended up kicking out and I was like right under the cliff, and it wasn't the biggest day, but still you could get wiped out by a 15-footer, which is like, I don't know, 30 to 40 foot face probably. And he saw me from across and went full throttle. And there's these side warbles that kind of bounce off the cliff and you can't really see them because they're invisible because they're kind of these long interval chops.
They have a lot of power behind them.
They have a lot of force. And for example, the Yamaha skis have, especially the model that he was driving has a very deep kind of V'd hull. And if you hit it sideways, it's called broaching. It kind of will just take a path the opposite direction, kind of like just getting bucked off a motorcycle in the whoops or something, when you watch Supercross or whatever. And it did just that to him. So he was going full speed to try to get me because he knew time was of the essence, but he ended up hitting this chop at the wrong angle and go flying. And I'm sitting on the right, watching him on the left get smoked.
But it shot his ski up at the wave.
Yeah.
So it went up into the lip of the wave.
It went up into the lip of the wave and barrel rolled. And I lost my GoPro and a screwdriver, which wasn't the biggest deal.
Did the ski open?
Just the front lid. I mean, so much force. It just ripped through the strap that holds it down. And I think every time I go there, I lose something. It's like you have to give back.
Did he get pounded on that wave?
He just made it under, but his ski obviously ended up on the shore.
Him.
And then I saw our friends who were Alamo, who's like he's like one of the top safety guys there at Nazaré. He went straight for Jose, obviously, to get him to go to the get the other ski, and there was one other photographer's ski, but it all looked like they were going towards him, and I was just in no man's land. I'm like, oh, it's just, this is gonna suck because I love this board, I love this foil. You know, I just got it this morning. I just got my equipment. It's gonna go on the rocks. I'm gonna go on the rocks. I'm gonna get really pounded in about 10 seconds here. And then luckily the camera ski like sent it in. And I don't think they were that excited about it. They're pretty nervous about going in there. They like staying where they can have an escape route. And in there, you're kind of trapped sometimes. But luckily we went out and they were able to get the ski, and the ski wasn't working too well.
Did
it was
the
like
other ski go all the way into the beach?
It went all the way into the beach, and they got it, right side up, so the handles, the handlebars didn't get tweaked in the sand. Because if it's upside down, that sand is like concrete, and you're just gonna rip everything apart. But when the ski came back, I think the engine kind of got flooded with fuel a little bit, so it was like it was running really pure, and so. It was kind of smoking a little bit, and no one knew if the engine was blown or what. It was just, I think, a rich mixture of fuel into the, there was just too much fuel in the chambers there, like the pistons, and it was like just creating a lot of smoke. But we ended up getting, after they deconstruct the entire engine, which is pretty rad at Nazaré. You can come in and they have like, mechanics, these Portuguese mechanics and German mechanics that are like, will tear the whole engine completely apart in one afternoon and put it all back together and have cleaned everything and
just ready for the next day.
Ready for the next day.
Wow. That's crazy.
But that was like, I would say, my only instance this trip where we happened. Actually, on that same foil session later on, and this is why I wear a helmet, it's so sketchy when you catch these giant swells on the foil, and at Nazaré, you have to get on the sled after every ride because the next one's breaking in the channel, right? And you have to try to get on with a foil with a long mast. Oh. And so I have to be so quick to get out of my feet out of the strap, flip it over, get it on top, and you're wearing a helmet with a sword by your head. And the reason why is because when you're driving through those, the foam, you're getting hit in the head by this mast like this. And so luckily I had a helmet, and Jose, who was driving.
Is it resting on your shoulder?
Well, you're kind of just laying on it, and it is resting on the shoulder, and the pad is kind of preventing it from like hurting your, your shoulder area. But the helmet is like right there kind of holding the mass from hitting your actual head. Because if you kind of get hit by that, you can easily get cut, obviously. And I think I nailed every single pickup. Like I was pretty proud of myself, but eventually you end up going over a whitewater that's pretty big, and what ends up happening if you don't gas it pretty hard, and this is what ended up happening. We went up and fell back onto the sled. And because I'm sitting, the way you do it is I slide the foil onto the seat of the jet ski and I sit on it to hold it down, and then the board's like in the gunnel and the foil's just hanging off the side. But you do that so you don't have the foil flying around, and you don't want to be holding it in case it catches the whitewater. But when that happened, Jose fell from the front, and because normally a board would be tighter to the hull, my board was sticking out a little bit, and he hit the side of his head on my board, and it looked like just like...
Is this after the ski loss?
This was actually the next day when it got bigger. No. It was like super big. It was like, I don't know, 30, 40. There was like 30, 35 foot face waves. Like it was like 60 plus feet on the face for sure, but it was stormy, rainy. There was sometimes lightning, and we ended up going to third peak, and it's more of a swell. And I mean, there was like 60 foot swells, but they were kind of slopey. So like they photographed small kind of, but they were 60 foot swells. And it was by far some of the biggest waves I ever foiled. And I felt like I was going a million miles an hour. And so it was a really good session to kind of feel the foil out and see what limits it had. It was too chaotic with foam and whitewater and current at the main peak. It was just unsurfable for a surfboard.
I didn't even think about that current, like how much that would change like the potential cavitation and how the foil and the flex of it would respond.
And all the sand in the water, it's just the density gets stronger. But he ended up hitting...
Jose had the ski the day before, and then the next day gets stitches.
And he just, after that, he felt pretty, I think he was pretty discouraged on any foil activity because
I
every
don't
time we had to
blame 'em.
foil something kind of went south, and because you had to be like a lot sharper just to like make the thing work there. But yeah, he got a split right here, and for the next, I think it was 2 days after that we were towing on normal boards, because it was such a split on your eyebrow, he'd glue it, never got stitches for it, but it kept opening up, so he constantly was just bleeding down his side of his face for the 2 other days. And I just kept telling him, you look pretty cool like that, so you should just run it. But he was like, kept trying to glue it back together, and it kept just bleeding profusely.
Oh,
Gosh.
He's like, it's wrecking my vision.
I swear, driving the ski there is borderline more extreme than surfing. It's almost less stressful to be surfing than I so far I've refused to drive a jet ski out there.
Yeah.
Like we've sat out the back before, and I'm just like,
I mean, nothing worse than driving someone else's jet ski out there.
right.
Not your own is one thing, but when it's
So
on
stressful.
loan or you rented it, which the funny thing is that ski that got barreled by a 50-foot wave was a rented jet ski, and it got completely obliterated.
That was one of the gnarliest things I've ever seen in my life. Was that yesterday that video dropped or something? But I was on my phone in the other room, and I just yelled like, "Oh my God!" And Sarah
I didn't think it was
Sarah was like,
possible.
"What are you watching right now?" And I showed it to her, and she had the same exact reaction. It was like that was one of the gnarliest big wave
Man,
videos
it's
you
like
could ever
3
see.
days in a row. I feel like each day I saw one, I was like, "Oh, that was pretty scary."
first-
but they like got out of it, and then not them, but like these other guys. And then the next day it was like somebody sent me another video of like a really heavy situation, and I was like, "Wow, that was scary."
The first one was actually Willie Santana, who's from Brazil, and he was teamed up with Lucas Chumbo,
Who was on the sled?
who was on the sled later on. But the first incident that we saw, we were like, and this is okay, we should go down this too. Lucas Chumbo snapped his ankle at Mavericks pulling into a barrel, and within a month was competing in the Nazaré Challenge in some of the choppiest, hardest to surf
I
conditions.
was wondering how he did that.
Surfing good.
And surfing
great.
really good. He was very upset that he got second because he's, obviously really competitive, and he'd won every event up to now. But we went and stopped and talked to him. I'm like, Chumbo, show me your ankle. And yeah, right after being only a month out, he pulls up like his pant leg, and I swear the ankle still looked broken, right? Ian, it was like
Granted,
a great.
he did just surf the bumpiest.
Oh,
Yeah, but it was a grapefruit size around your ankle. Like if it was me, I wouldn't have surfed. There's just no way. I don't know if Ian would have either. That was so crazy. But the funniest thing is not the fact that he. It wasn't the fact that he surfed the contest with a broken ankle and the thing was as inflated as like, I don't know, just a big fruit of some kind, but that he went out the very next day and was just going buck wild with Willie. And they ended up like being stuck in that, wedge that you described earlier, Ridge. And he ends up going up like a ramp, and they end up supermanning it, and the ski flipped over on them, and they bailed, and the ski was upside down, and they're big, strong guys, and obviously pros, and they flipped it over real quick and got out of there.
They did. I thought an interesting technique. I don't know if I've ever seen that, where he jumps on the gunnel, like the fin off the side with his feet, and then grabs the grate where the impeller is. And then flip there and then grabs the other gunnel. And I was like, I don't think I've flipped over many a jet ski. I don't think I've ever gone that approach for leverage.
I wouldn't want to be sticking my fingers in the grate on a machine that's running.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe it killed it, but I was like,
I don't think so. Because that was a Sea-Doo, and that thing is pretty sealed up on the top, and I think she runs. It's intercooled. It's not like...
It got that thing over quick.
But that doesn't end there. It gets even better because the next day... No one else is out at this point. Like I went out in the morning or whatever, but like Chumbo's out there, broken ankle and all. And this accident's happened. He actually sucked up a tow rope. And did you remember that one where he had to bail and jump through? Him and Who was with him? I think, was it Willie or was it Lucas Fink? Someone was with him, and it's just,
once the rope goes in, you're just dead in the water.
You're dead in the water, and it's not to cut down on Chumbo at all. It's actually just admiration for the guy being so gnarly. Dude, 3 days in a row pumping Nazaré, worst conditions you can imagine because of swell direction and wind, broken ankle, and you're just sending it and just like nonstop. And then they ended up doing another contest right after we left, and that was that crazy moment. And you watched some of the highlights on that. Yeah. He went right initially into the worst place you could go.
I was
to
so
wipe out.
Interested in like that scenario because it was so scary, and I was glad everyone's okay, both the driver and the guy on the sled, and then everyone that went in to get both of them afterwards. Like, that is an absolutely frightening scenario that I went back and I was like, I want to see it from like a wide view, how that all unfolded. And it was just a giant wave that he went on the wave before. It looked like it was so bumpy, it was hard to get a rail in to like make some angle and a direction to cut into some of the distance to get towards the shoulder. Got pounded, and then that next wave just, Nazaré is interesting where sometimes it can be equally the same size of a wave or sometimes bigger, but there's so much water filled in the bay there that it misses that same place the previous wave broke.
Yeah.
And it kind of moves in and loads up on itself. So it's really interesting. Like most other waves, the bigger wave in the set, the second, or even, a lot of times the second wave in the set will break outside of where the first one did or right where it broke. Like they kind of go out in that manner. And that one, which it does do there a lot, it kind of shifted in and moved in quite a bit with all the water, and then it just seemed like it loaded up and just absolute worst case scenario.
I've been in that situation. Actually, the second event I ever did there was
what
with
do you do
Chumbo.
There?
No, I've been in that situation where I towed Chumbo into a left. It was in the same spot. It was first peak. He fell like what they would call 1.5 or whatever. And that's exactly where, this time Willie was. And you have to be careful because there's like a surge behind that one big one. So the next wave butts up against it, like you said, and it misses the outer peak where it would normally slow down and stand up. It just kind of like is rushing in like a tsunami because of all that water. And I remember purposely not going in because it was too tight. And I think who was ever driving this time around was so keen on just getting his guy.
He was so early too. He was
like
on it. And there was nothing. He was on him the second he popped up, and he did everything right. There was just no way to outrun that wave.
I sent you a meme that I saw was I'm a very calculated person, but I'm horrible at math. And that is like, I would say, in total what it means to serve Nazaré, because your normal math that you would do in your head to be like distance, pickup, okay, like approach, where you can make the wave from, all those things doesn't count. Anything I learned from Jaws, Mavericks, any wave that has some perfection to it, like in terms of like a reef and a defined channel, Nazaré, you throw that all out. So you can be the most calculated person ever, but your math might be just wrong from the beginning. It's just fundamentally wrong. And then you end up in that position.
Yeah. It's so hard. It's so hard there. And you're just that time to you could do everything right in that with getting your guy on the sled, and that next wave is just bearing down on you.
What about that moment though, because there's been in that scenario again where Lucas jumped off or got knocked off and I was stuck on the sled. Nothing nearly as big as this, but it was in a previous Nazaré comp.
You had a few. You had one at Jaws too.
I've had a couple at Jaws, like in the contests over the years, but I know there's not enough time for anyone to say anything to anybody. So, I was talking to a few people who were like, why did he tell the guy on the sled he was jumping? I'm like, first of all, you see, when you're on the sled, you see whatever he's doing. And then that gives you, obviously the thought to get off there. But have you ever been on it's like being on a moving object and you're stuck to it.
Yeah.
Like you're literally like glued to it and you're trying to push off, but there's like an inertia, like a gravity that you're like stuck to. And you could see Willie Santana trying to slide off the back, but he's like glued to it from the inertia.
You have no leverage. Like if you're sitting on the top, you could jump off with your legs. But if you're just crawling off of it, it's almost impossible.
It's going vertical.
He's lucky he didn't die.
That must have been the scariest thing, him seeing his driver just
Can
bailing.
you imagine, though,
and you're just
I'm safe. I know what this feels like, but this is on another level. I'm safe. And then just seeing the curtain of a 50-foot wave just go darkness in front of you. Like, that's cartoon. That was cartoon. That's and they had a GoPro on there.
Oh, God.
That is like beyond. Yeah,
it was one of the scariest situations I feel like we've ever seen. I feel like
could it ever top that?
I don't think so.
But what's the alternative too? I thought about that. I was like, well, if he like to try, like, would it have been better to maybe not grab the sled? Would he have been far enough out that maybe he could have swam through that wave?
He would have made it 100%.
Because they move in quite a bit while he's getting on the sled. So would that distance been enough to maybe let the wave go past, But then I still don't know, even without grabbing him, if the ski would have been able to outrun
He did it for the likes and comments. Just didn't realize it at the time.
So crazy. And then then afterwards, like the pickup of both.
Did you see?
I guess that's why it's like a great example of like having multiple skis in the water for that. A long time ago, if that like there's no comms with communication with other teams or whatever, they might be just on their own in the worst spot in that lineup.
In that OG era when those guys were out on like 1200 cc, probably 120 horsepower, 2-stroke machines, like Garrett's first few times with Kili'i Mamala and a few others. I mean, how do you even navigate that? We have the most powerful skis you could have, and you still feel like you're like on the edge constantly there.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with like the turbulent water there. Like it's just a challenging place to ride a jet ski. But the other side to that is it will make you a really switched on driver, and it'll also make you like really switched on to reading the ocean. There's so many different ways the bump and reverb is coming at you, and the wind and the rip lines are different. It's like at Porto, the rip can pull out and move all over the beach. So you kind of, when you're paddling it, when it's big, you're identifying where those rip lines are and making sure you're not in one when you're trying to actually catch a wave. And out there, it's doing that a lot in different areas. So that it's like you're constantly reading the ocean that's changing like by the second.
Oh, yeah. It makes you really appreciate coming back to Jaws and its uniformity and somewhat predictableness, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're towing Jaws, right, it's the most predictable wave to surf. Paddling, it's just you're taking off late, and so the nuances become amplified.
And that's like some of those like Jaws and Mavericks, like you can, if you do everything right, you can get a giant wave, ride it really critically, and then if you successfully finish the wave, kick out in the channel and like sit down on your board and take a breath like, oh, that was fucking heavy. But you can actually like absorb that. At Nazaré, like you can do everything right. Get a giant wave, ride it to the tee, kick out in the channel, full speed, and everything, like not even get your hair wet, and then just get a complete sideways right from the other direction that lands straight on your head before the next jet ski gets there.
I'm most scared.
You can do everything right and still get
I'm not scared on the wave. I'm scared kicking out. Because you just are... You get over that edge and you're just hoping your guy is right there. I'm hoping Ian's there.
I was like, because he'll milk the wave and then just do like a flyaway kick out as it's like wedging. Where if you mistime that, you are getting so annihilated in the biggest wedge ever. And I'm like, I wish I just could have 1 ounce of the blind faith you have in me being there right when you kick out.
Full blind faith that you're going to be right there to pick me up.
And you don't really know, because a lot of times you're dropping in and it's like, is he going left? Is he going right? You know, like
maybe it's like a better right or better left.
At the last minute, if he changes to right, like
you're
you
better
kinda
off
have to
yeah.
read what he's doing from the ski so fast.
That sounds.
And then that's one of the benefits to having a spotter if you have a radio close by.
We had a spotter, but he only spoke Portuguese, so we didn't really understand a word he said.
Yeah, you just hear norte. Yeah.
Esquerda.
Yeah. Gosh. Let's see what else.
But that's another good thing about there too, is it does tune you up for kind of being there at the wave's end. Like if there is a successful wave, it's like to your point, your guard's never down out there.
Oh yeah.
You're kind of always like switched on. Even when like we had to go in one time when we got Kai and go into the beach, and you're constantly like, we had a longer than usual tow rope, so I was like constantly like eyeballing where I was anticipating the end of the tow rope would be, and you're doing these circles, jumping waves, and it takes like 15 whitewash jumps to get back out sometimes. And even just that, like the amount of focus that it takes over and over, like one little lapse of paying attention and you're like done. And the same goes for riding a wave. I guess that's any big wave, but when it's smooth, I feel like you can reconnect with like so much more of you're just letting go of everything, and it's more of a feeling, where if it's really bumpy, you're really focused on reading what's coming at you and what's under your feet. And I remember thinking to myself a couple times, like after I let go of the rope and you're starting to drop down the wave and gain speed as the wave really starts to lurch up, and thinking like, okay, like you really got to pay attention here to every bump. Like nothing's like a consistent feeling.
Oh yeah. And the one thing I really noticed that was unique about Nazaré versus some of the other ones is that it feels like once the wave peaks up and gets to its maximum height, the water almost goes dead in a sense, in that it will lurch up and then it just kind of all just collapses and crashes in whatever direction it wants to go, versus Jaws, it's constantly sort of drawing off the reef, and same with Mavericks to an extent, that it almost, you can be in a more critical spot for longer. Like if you end up in the wrong spot at Nazaré, you're sinking essentially. You know, it's such a different approach.
And I think there's so many clips and photos of that like iconic image of people like dropping in and going left, especially backside surfers. The frontside guys, I think, have a really good read on what's coming. But you'll see late in the day the way the sun set up there. And I had like looked at it and seen it over and over. And then the first time I went there, like you tow into a few big waves and you're so focused on getting down the face of these big mountains. And then once that shadow comes over you, to your point, you're like almost a little bit lost. And you can see some of the videos of people where it like, they might get lost for like just a second. Do I start turning now, or is it am I too far on the shoulder, or am I too deep? It's hard to like gauge where you are really. And that's when that thing just comes from behind. It's like once that shadow comes over you, if you're not like really cutting down the distance to get down the line, it's like absolute.
You're just waiting for it.
Yeah, and it's just like you can feel like the shadow comes over you, and it's an interesting perspective based on the time of the day with where the sun is.
Gosh,
like it goes dark.
That's the hardest wave I think I've ever surfed backside, because it's like you said, Ridge, it's just out to sea. Yeah. Because it's a mountain and it's slopey, but it's so tall, and it is steep in certain areas, but the only way to tell where you are, because you're not looking back as you're going 40 miles an hour down a wave. You have to be looking forward. The only way to measure how deep you are is how far that shadow goes. And if it goes 10, 12 feet in front of you, you're probably in the perfect spot. It's going to be close to you. It's going to explode, and it's going to be thrilling ride and you're going to ride it out, make it. But if that shadow goes 20, 25 feet in front of you or more, you're like, it's like just a monster behind you. It's catching.
Make up that distance. That's like you know, it's like this fine line.
It seals your
fate.
Yeah.
You're like, it's like
you're like 5, 4, 3, 2.
Yeah, it's like when you let go of the rope, all your you're making really important decisions right as you're at the top of that wave. And then once you're at the bottom, you kind of, you can't really do much. At Jaws Mavericks, there's an ability to do some work and drive or go up high or make some adjustments on the wave. And that's the one thing that freaked me the most out about Nazaré. It's just full commitment from the start, and then you can't do a whole lot, and sometimes you just get absolutely screwed.
And maybe the other way to approach that would be like you can see some of the guys, especially the frontsiders, come in from so deep
and low too, right?
And they're like towing
they're like cutting cross though. They're it's
so
like just
they probably
traversing the mountain.
Yeah, they probably don't ever. Yeah, they're just like in the hook from the start and slingshotting through the wave. Whereas like if you're approaching it instead of going that way and you're going down, it changes, like you're syncing with the rhythm of that wave a little bit. And I think
Chumbo always does that really good. Like you tow him in and then he fades because he's front side, and he'll just he'll do like this mid-face long bottom turn. He gets all this projection. He can get up in the barrel sometimes when it barrels, but it's just wild how important it is to be front side there on the lefts.
Right.
You don't see the backside guys ever go right. I mean, why would they when it's predominantly a left anyway? But it's just such a hard wave to surf backside because it's like trying to surf a small wave that's spreading out to sea. You try to do a top turn, you can't get your board there. You're like almost there, and then it's too steep, and you're like and it's always moving away. Front side, you can kind of like open your shoulders and like carve and make a big glide with your board and
just getting the projection,
well, that's
front
why
side, you could just like reach up the wave.
Like seeing it on some of the real big A-framey peaky days that are giant, and then compared to like some of the swells that are a little straighter and more closeouts, it definitely changes like the approach to, I think, each wave. And then even the days like we've paddled there in the past, of them were like really peaky days that were, it's just like a different program of like how you're approaching the waves. I think when it's like that, there's maybe a little bit less hanging on and more like focused on the surfing. And then when it's really wonky and maybe that rip's running through there, it's more like you're like survival surfing at that point.
Oh gosh, yeah, 100%. And I'm sure it'll be nice for you guys to get some nice clean Jaws days, hopefully soon. But before we wrap up too, it'd be a shame to not touch on how crazy our winter's been here. And you've had, one of the best performances, I'd say, just through that whole December run. And then we had a couple swells in January. But how would this winter stack up against, say, I guess the next or the best one I could think of would be that El Nino 2015, 2016. What are your thoughts on this year?
I mean, I don't think this season can hold a candle to that one, like in size. And I guess I don't think this season can hold a candle to that 2015, 2016 El Nino winter as far as the size goes. But we did have like this flurry of waves here that were really good and really consistent. Like, I don't know if I've seen winters where you have swells that are back to back in the sense of like, it's maybe 2 in a week or once a week. It's almost like spread out in like a 5-day cadence. Like every 5 days there's a big swell, which that can get like pretty condensed the way the storm systems are shaping up. Then you're having these storms that are following big ones that get a lot of lead in and runway from that previous storm. So you'll get that cadence for, every week, maybe a big swell for a little window. But I've never seen one where it's like every day. For like
that was crazy
5 or 6 days every day.
There's
really
some big days too on those 6 days.
And then even like the small, like I've never been in a scenario at Jaws where I'm like looking at a pretty good day and I'm like, oh, it looks fun. but you're like having to think like, I hate to not surf this because you don't want to like leave waves for other waves that might come. But you're like looking at the forecast, like I got to keep my body together to surf a progressively bigger swell every day for the next 6 days.
Yeah.
Like each day was giant. Like we were talking about it and coming home, like barely like having enough energy to like clean all the gear off, get things prepped to get up at 4 o'clock or
That was a
3:30 the
crazy
next
run.
morning again. And then at the very culmination of that is the day that Eddie ran, and then Jaws was like 10 million feet.
Yeah, so I've only done a couple 2-day back-to-back big waves sessions before, and I find your adrenaline is just such at a peak level for so long, even the night between. So I was sick for that swell run, but what did it seem like an extra gnarly come down after 6 days of giant waves, or did your body sort of get used to it in a weird way?
I think it got better for me. Like you
Really?
start getting beat up, you're like kind of game ready. And at that
All
point,
warm.
yeah, and then you're like, okay, winter's here. There's no more like getting ready for the big day that's coming. Like that happens in the fall when you're training and getting all your equipment dialed and prepped for when the winter really starts to take off. It's like winter's here now, and it felt like you're just in the mix. Like I don't think there was ever a come down, and it kept kind of snowballing right into January, and we had a flurry of swells. A lot of them came with a little bit more west angle in them, so they weren't like that iconic giant day at Jaws, but they were really fun swells. And that it was just like this compounding series of, yeah, just I think like that gets lost sometimes in like how fast everything can happen. But for me, I feel like it just feel kind of better once we're surfing.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like the body has such a crazy way of adapting. It's almost, yeah, you're totally right. Sometimes the first day when you're all rested and you're supposed to be feeling all good, your body almost goes into shock, and then a few swells in or a few days in, you kind of get in the rhythm of it, and your body sort of accepts it. Okay, this is what we're
And
doing now.
I think like with that, like I learned a lot like in doing other sports, like or doing endurance type of things, like climbing big mountains or snowboarding or being in the backcountry, like different things you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and things your body's not used to doing. Like if you're doing those consecutively for a while, yes, it's important to have rest for performance and all that. But there's also another side to that where your body, to your point, is going to start adapting and being like, all right, this idiot is going to wake up at 3:30 again and just go bell to bell as hard as he can. So we better just get used to this.
Yeah.
And when
Survival.
yeah, it starts to get in there. And I think also to your point, like there's something about having less thought to the approach. So like there's less analysis going on. Your body's just reacting and responding to like your gut's intuition and your decision making live in the moment. And I think there's a lot of good that can come from that. And the other really good point to having those consecutive days is there's another day. For Kai and I, we got to like blaze through so many different boards that we wanted to test, so many different fins we wanted to test, so many different approaches to the way we wanted to surf. And you come in, and rather than waiting 10 days or 2 weeks for the next swell, it's like the next morning you can like work to correct some things you felt like you wanted to do better. If you're like to equate that to like an NFL player, during their regular season, they have another game the next week. And like they're really stoked that they have that opportunity. Whether they had a good game or a bad game that week, they get to like enhance whatever happened the following week. And then you get into the playoffs and they lose, it's single elimination, their year's done
Yeah.
till the next season.
Yeah.
So I love that feeling of like, we're still in it, there's still more coming. And I still feel that way with the Pacific. Like, you're just like appreciative of like there's might be more opportunity, so you're still staying focused. And I look at it like 4 quarters. Like you have November, December, January, February. And I think it's really important to stay as diligent and focused in February as it is to come into it in November.
Right. 100%.
Finish strong, like feeling good, and finish like don't don't, like, if a good day pops up now, don't just let it go because you've had X amount of days already this season.
100%. It's such a unique aspect of this sport that you only have sometimes in a sort of poor season for Jaws. What do you have, like 5 days to really do your sport at the highest level?
Hmm.
There isn't any other sport in the world like that, I don't think. And it is hard when I've had it where the last swell you may have just barrel dodged one or gotten too deep and blew a good one, and then you're just like, I have to sit through 4, 5, 6 months of rehashing that wave in my head, and it'll just tear you apart. And it's that is such an interesting side of
That's
it.
also what can make you so good too. Like, you have that, like, and a good thing to take away from that is it means you still care.
Yeah,
Like, once you
yeah.
lose that, it's kind of gone. And I think, like, with big wave surfing, like, you look at it. Do you need to wait for that? Is
No,
that okay?
it shouldn't pop up. Man.
With big wave surfing, like, a good way to look at it is also, like, sometimes, yes, you might have a slower season as far as big waves in the northern hemisphere, but you can really, like, broaden up the scope and look at things by, like, a decade perspective, and it changes how, like, everything looks, or even a 5 year window, and how much can be accomplished in those 5 years, rather than, oh, last winter was maybe a slow season, or this winter was kind of a buck wild season, day after day after day.
Yeah, totally. And something I think that we're really inspired by what you've done with your career is, I mean, we've all seen the guys that come on so strong into the big wave scene. They're super gnarly, getting crazy waves, and they sort of, I don't know if it's they lose the passion for it or maybe they get super smoked, but they only last a few seasons. And just for me, I mean, I'm still relatively early into my career, but just thinking about where you are at, still going out at the highest level, that's another 10 plus years I potentially could have of doing it. And what is your like advice to us about staying at that really high level, high intensity for, a long period of time and having a long career out there?
I think, like, the probably the biggest takeaway I have is, like, listen to yourself. Like, some days you're going to be breathing fire and things are lining up. Some days things aren't going your way, and it's really easy to sometimes let your ego get in the way. Like, I just got to, like, force a good wave, and that's, like, a lot of the times I've been snapped off and I get hurt. And it's like there's a lot to be learned, I think, through a long process. And I think there's also something to be said about, like, appreciating the days too. A lot of times I was just so wound up in, like, everything that's happening right there, and then the next swell, you're, like, rarely ever, like, lifting your head up off the treadmill, like, oh, this is actually, like, really beautiful. So I think, to I guess, to put a simple point on, like, my advice to, like, longevity in it is, okay, you and I have spoken quite a bit about that, is, like, identify the right days and then pay attention to when those days happen, what made them special. Like, whether that's even just small note taking, and then identifying on another level what the forecast was doing, so you can kind of anticipate some of those coming again when they line up. Like, the time we went to Mavs, I was like, I've been here quite a few times. I don't think I've ever seen one that looks like this. And then, sure enough, that day was, like, unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a balance because we were just talking about there's so few days to go and do it, but at the same time you have to be really calculated and like you said, it comes with the knowledge of just doing it for many years, to be say at that North Peak, be in the spot, but you see that fang down line
Hmm.
and just have the ability to be like, do you know what, not this one.
Hmm.
And that could be the difference between, a wipeout that can take years off your career.
Yeah.
So it is that balance where you have to really capitalize on those really few days, but also really know what you're doing and
And
not
tr-
get yourself picked off.
and trust your gut. Yeah, the
Yeah.
consequences are really high. So it's like, knowing, like, you've been surfing your whole life, like, when a wave is lining up and you feel it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, to me, like, Kai and I have spoken about this, like, the wave almost catches you when you're like fighting tooth and nail into it, a lot of times you end up just getting lifted. So there is something with that. And I think you have to just kind of enjoy the whole thing, everything that comes with it, the good and the bad, and then it starts to like even out.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well,
What do you think, Kai, with like the approach to like a long term? I guess you've been doing this a long time too.
I agree with you. Just, there's always going to be another wave. So if you miss one, don't let it eat you up, or don't, I think people come in hot, and you can only ride that lightning for so long, or fly too close to the sun before your wings melt. And so it's like it's so much easier when you have a good day. Like, how much easier is it to surf big waves when it just is a good day? And most of the times it's not. And so just having that wherewithal to not treat every single session like it's just as easy as the one before. Read the room a little bit, like, okay, well, I might have to change my goals for this session. And it's like you do think a lot of mind surfing after the fact on what you could have done better on your approach. Maybe it was equipment. I don't think people focus too much on maybe the equipment being able to be really helpful to actually keeping your career going long, because most people pick a couple guns out and big boards or tow boards, and they're like, I got it. And then they order another one, and they don't necessarily know what they're ordering. It's not like this, like what we do, where every detail sort of matters. And I feel like if I'm on the right board, it gives you that much confidence as well. And then it allows you to pull stuff off that maybe you wouldn't before. But I think attention to detail beyond just the surfing part, obviously learning the forecasting elements, but then the equipment, the water safety for sure. And then just, being in the right state of mind to be able to say no. Like, I just have a gut feeling about this wave. I kind of could go, but listening to that gut feeling will guide you your whole career. But if you go fight against it, all of a sudden you will start losing confidence and questioning any decision you ever make, and you won't know how to recognize that gut feeling.
Another thing I would add to that is like being ready. Like, be ready.
Of course, yeah.
Like, have your stuff set. Like, have your gear ready. Be ready for when it comes.
Backup of everything.
Yeah, like those days are so far and few between, and I can think about so many special sessions where if I didn't have a board out there after I broke my other board, or I didn't have this, or I didn't have that, those really special moments over a long period of time in the ocean wouldn't have happened. Like, I would have just been kind of sitting on the beach watching instead of like being able to get back out there because I had my shit together.
Yeah.
Like, have your stuff together and think about it. Like, if you want to go surf big waves, like, don't be, trying to find fins and CO2 cartures at 11 p.m.
Or asking other people for their equipment.
Yeah,
Or if you do got to ask, do it ahead of time.
Well, ask ahead of time for sure, but it's like in the water and you're like trying to bum stuff off of other people. They're just like, no one's gonna want to deal with you.
Yeah.
I think that can give like a lot of runway to like when the day comes, you're thinking more about the surfing than you are about getting to do the surfing. And that's one of the challenges with very big surf, is just actually getting out there. It's always going to be a chaotic environment.
Right.
It's always going to be adversity you're going to have to get through just to put yourself in a position to have a chance at maybe catching a wave.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know what's going to happen to the boats. You don't know what's going to happen to the jet skis. If you're going from the beach, you might not even get through the shore break. Like, there's a million different things that can go on. So it's kind of like those little things you have control over, like, get them taken care of. Cross your T's and dot your I's.
Yeah, and I think it's also for you guys, what really separates you is that you're just simply really good surfers and you fall a lot less than a lot of people. I think that's a really obviously you don't want to fall in these big waves, but and most of the time, say on average, if you're going to fall at Jaws, 9 times out of 10, you're going to pop up just fine, with all the safety measures. But it's just that, say it happens 1 out of every 10 is really going to flex you hard. And if you're falling a lot, the odds are, that's going to degrade your body fast. And it really is as simple as that.
I look at it like Super Mario life in the session.
Yeah,
you have like your full life, and then the one wave you fall, it gets depleted a little bit. You get caught inside, it gets depleted a little bit more. You take another fall because you're a little winded, and that one is the one you get really snapped off. So now you're like in the red, barely hanging on to the session, and you're like, if I get caught or I fall again, it might be like done for me today.
Oh gosh.
So you're like, I think there is an approach to that, but you have to surf with like, I guess there's like a sense of being calculated and also like coupling in reckless abandon and trusting your gut. Like when you feel like you have a wave, and sometimes those really special waves are the ones you don't think you're going to make when you just find a line through them and the wave gives you an opportunity to make.
Yeah, there's a bit of luck involved there, definitely.
Like you had an incredible wave this year. Like I've seen you get countless waves where you're like, oh, it's pretty late. Like you had one this year on your little board. Like you're like, oh, I don't know. But that little board fit in the transition of the wave and allowed you to get down it.
Yeah.
And then yours was just a funnel of dreams.
It was nice while it lasted, and then I got kind of smoked at the end. But God, it looks like we might have something on Friday, but we'll see. Hopefully, I really hope we get a couple more chances this year. I mean, I guess we should be stoked with what we've already had. It's been an insane season, but yeah, hopefully
it's always
more.
good. Like we've had a good season, but it'd be great to have a couple more days. Like we were just talking about, it'd be nice to be able to test a couple more boards and a couple things we updated through all those swells before we go into summer.
Yeah,
It's just different. The southern hemisphere stuff is a lot different than the northern hemisphere. I think like your focus for type of waves changes a little bit for me personally.
Yeah.
And then it like by the time, to your point, then you have all summer to kind of think about.
Just let it stew. Yeah. Well, right on. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Hopefully, the next podcast we're wrapping up hopefully a fun Jaws swell. But thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Ian. I was stoked to have you. Yeah, let's do it again.
Thanks for coming in, Ian.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, till next time.